about we drive to Paris?
What?
The 1980s were wild when it came to TV spin-offs. If a show even sniffed success, the network execs were already in a room somewhere asking, okay, but can we get one more series out of this? Sometimes it worked. You got genuine classics that stood on their own. But for every hit, there was a forgotten cousin that crashed and burned so fast, it barely had time to show up in the TV guide. That's what we're diving into today. 7 forgotten TV show spin-offs of the 1980s that totally flopped. These weren't random experiments. These were shows spun out of some of the biggest hits on television. Series like MASH, Happy Days, The Brady Bunch, The Jeffersons, All in the Family, and Cheers. On paper, they had everything going for them. Familiar faces, built-in fan bases, and primetime real estate. In reality, they were ratings disasters that quietly disappeared, never to be seen in syndication marathons or nostalgia blocks. We'll talk about why networks thought these spin-offs were sure things, what went wrong once the cameras started rolling, and how some of them tried to fix their mistakes by awkwardly shoving the characters back into the original shows. Along the way, you might have a few, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that moments. Or you might discover shows you had no idea ever existed. Before we jump in, if you love diving into the weird, forgotten corners of TV history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets us keep digging up these lost relics from the tube's past. Alright, let's check in at the bottom of the list with number 7. 7. Checking in. The Jeffersons' maid moves out. Let's start with a character who absolutely stole scenes on The Jeffersons, Florence Johnston. As the Jeffersons' wisecracking maid, she was a fan favorite. Sharp tongue, killer timing, and zero fear of putting George in his place. So naturally, CBS thought, perfect, let's give her her own show. Checking In picks up when Florence leaves the Jeffersons' apartment and takes a new job as the executive housekeeper at the upscale St. Frederick Hotel in New York City. On paper, it feels like a slam dunk. You've got a beloved character, a new workplace setting with endless guest star potential, and a structure that could have turned into a kind of mini Love Boat meets the Jeffersons. Each week, new guests, new problems, and Florence right in the middle of it with that world-class side-eye. But almost immediately, the cracks started to show. The new supporting cast never really clicked. Without the familiar dynamic of George, Louise, and the rest of the Jeffersons, Florence felt oddly adrift. The hotel setting leaned on broad hijinks instead of the sharper social humor that made the Jeffersons work. Jokes felt flatter, stories felt thinner, and the whole thing lacked the spark that made Florence so much fun in the first place. The audience noticed. Checking In only lasted 4 episodes. 4, before CBS pulled the plug. In one of the most brutal wrap-ups ever, the Jeffersons later explained that the hotel burned down and Florence came back to work for the Jeffersons like nothing happened. Checking In is a perfect example of a lesson networks kept ignoring. Just because you love a side character in small doses doesn't mean they can carry an entire series. And that's a pattern we're going to see again, especially when we get to a certain Brady sequel. 6. The Brady Brides, When Happily Ever After, didn't last long. By the early 80s, the Brady Bunch wasn't just a canceled sitcom, it was a full-blown nostalgia machine. Reruns kept the show alive, fans still loved the theme song, and any chance to bring the Bradys back to TV got attention. So when a reunion movie did well, the powers that be thought, why stop there? Enter the Brady Brides. This spin-off centered on Marcia and Jan, all grown up and getting married. The twist? Their very different new husbands end up moving into the same house with them. It's the Brady formula turned into an early 80s odd couple sitcom. 2 couples under one roof, clashing personalities, and plenty of domestic misunderstandings. It was supposed to be a natural evolution. Take that sunny Brady charm and add a slightly more adult spin. The problem is that the Brady Brides never figured out what it wanted to be. It was caught between cozy nostalgia and trying to be a contemporary sitcom. The humor leaned heavily on recycled Brady-style gags, but the situations weren't as fresh or endearing. The husbands felt more like types than fully fleshed-out characters, and the show never really convinced viewers that this new household had the same heart as the original Brady clan. On top of that, part of what people loved about the Brady Bunch was the sheer chaos of a big family. Stripping it down to just two sisters and their spouses made the world feel smaller and, honestly, a little dull. The stakes felt lower, the problems more generic. The result? The Brady Brides only lasted 10 episodes. Despite all that Brady nostalgia floating around, audiences just didn't buy into this next chapter. It's a classic case of a network trying to bottle lightning twice and ending up with warm static. And speaking of taking one character out of their original ecosystem and hoping for the best, our next entry tried something similar, with a very familiar face from All in the Family. 5. Gloria. All in the Family's daughter goes solo. If you grew up with All in the Family, you know Gloria Stevick as Archie and Edith's daughter, the one stuck between her father's old-school stubbornness and her husband Michael's progressive fire. She was part of one of TV's most iconic ensembles, and as that universe expanded with Archie Bunker's place, it seemed like there might be room for Gloria to step into her own spotlight. Gloria, the spin-off, asks a simple question: what happens to Gloria after her marriage to Michael falls apart? The show finds her as a single mom, raising her young son Joey and working as an assistant at a veterinary clinic. It's a softer, more domestic setup. Less political fireworks, more heartfelt, everyday struggles. In theory, it could have been a grounded, emotional comedy about starting over. But from the beginning, Gloria had problems behind the scenes. Norman Lear and Carol O'Connor, the creative forces behind All in the Family, weren't really involved. The concept went through retooling between pilots, and that uncertainty shows on screen. The tone wobbles between lighthearted sitcom and something more dramatic, but it never quite hits the sweet spot. Without Archie, Edith, or even Michael to bounce off of, Gloria feels strangely isolated. The vet clinic co-workers aren't nearly as memorable as the Bunker family, and the scripts don't give Gloria the same depth she had when she was part of those family clashes. Instead of feeling like a natural evolution of her character, it plays more like a generic early 80s single mom sitcom that just happens to star someone you recognize. The show did manage to air a full season, 21 episodes, but the ratings never matched the expectations that came with the All in the Family name. By spring of 1983, CBS quietly canceled it, and Gloria faded into TV trivia. It's a textbook example of how pulling one character out of a perfectly balanced ensemble can backfire. But what happens when you do the reverse? Keep the star, change everyone around them, and hope that's enough. That's exactly what happened with our next forgotten spinoff. 4. Three's a Crowd. Jack Tripper grows up, and ratings go down. Three's Company without the roommates. That's basically the pitch behind Three's a Crowd, the spinoff that tried to answer the question, what happens when Jack Tripper finally grows up? At the end of Three's Company, Jack is no longer the perpetually single, misunderstanding magnet sharing an apartment with two women. Instead, he's in a committed relationship with his girlfriend Vicky and opening his own restaurant. Three's a Crowd picks up right there. Jack and Vicky move into an apartment above the restaurant, but there's a catch. Vicky's father owns the building and absolutely does not approve of Jack. Cue the tension. On paper, this makes sense. John Ritter was the heart of Three's Company. If you're going to keep anything, you keep Jack. Giving him a new setting, a serious relationship, and an overbearing father-in-law to spar with sounds like a good way to evolve his character while keeping the comedy going. But the magic of Three's Company wasn't just Jack. It was the whole chaotic ecosystem around him. The roommates, Mr. Roper or Mr. Furley. The constant mistaken identities and farcical misunderstandings that came from that living arrangement. In Three's a Crowd, that high-wire act is replaced by more conventional domestic sitcom plots. Jack trying to impress Vicky's dad. Jack trying to balance work and love. Jack dealing with everyday couple drama. It's familiar, but not in a good way. The new supporting cast just never gels the way the original ensemble did. Vicky is likable, but not as distinct as Janet or Chrissy, and her father feels more like a stock sitcom grump than a truly memorable foil. The physical comedy that John Ritter excelled at is still there, but it sits on top of stories that feel flatter and less inspired. ABC gave the show a full 22-episode season, but the ratings told the story. Without the original roommates and setup, Three's a Crowd felt like a watered-down echo of what fans loved. After one season, the network shut the doors on Jack's new life. If that sounds like a case of you can't just move one character and expect the same show, wait until we get to a spin-off that tried to launch two fan favorites into their own musical dream in Chicago. 3. Joanie Loves Chachi. Happy Days Young Lovers Can't Carry a Series. If you watched Happy Days in its later seasons, you know Joanie and Chachi were a big deal. The studious little sister of Richie and the cool, streetwise cousin of Fonzie. Of course, viewers got invested in their on-again, off-again teenage romance. They had chemistry, they had fan support, and they even had a musical angle. To ABC, that looked like spin-off gold. Joanie Loves Chachi takes the couple out of Milwaukee and drops them in Chicago, where they're chasing their rock and roll dreams. They form a band, perform in a club run by Chachi's family, and juggle love, ambition, and the ups and downs of young adulthood in the big city. The vibe is part romance, part music show, with plenty of opportunities for songs and teen-focused storylines. The problem is that once you remove Joanie and Chachi from the Happy Days universe, you also remove a lot of what made them interesting. On Happy Days, they were surrounded by larger-than-life personalities. Fonzie, Howard, Marion, Potsy, and the rest of the gang. The contrast between their young love story and the rest of the world gave them context. In Joanie Loves Chachi, they're suddenly the entire show. The band and extended family members around them never really become compelling characters in their own right. The club setting gives an excuse for musical numbers, but those musical interludes sometimes feel like padding rather than organic storytelling. The scripts tend to lean on simple plots, jealousy, minor misunderstandings, career decisions, without the emotional depth or humor that Happy Days could bring to similar themes. Interestingly, the show premiered with solid ratings, especially when ABC aired it behind Happy Days. But when it had to stand on its own, viewers drifted away. After just 17 episodes, the network pulled the plug and brought Joanie and Chachi back to Happy Days, as if the whole detour had been a brief experiment. It's a reminder that popularity inside an ensemble doesn't always equal spin-off success. And that brings us to another lesson networks had to learn the hard way. You can't just grab the loudest side characters from a hit show, build a new world around them, and expect magic. Just ask the Tortellis. 2. The Tortellis. Cheers without the bar. Cheers is one of those shows that seems almost bulletproof in hindsight. A bar full of lovable losers, razor-sharp writing, a perfect mix of heart and sarcasm. And later, it even spawned one of the most successful spin-offs of all time, Frasier. But before Frasier ever set foot in Seattle, NBC tried a different Cheers spin-off, and it did not go well. The Tortellis centers on Nick Tortelli, Carla's ex-husband, and his new wife, the sweet but dim Loretta. On Cheers, Nick and Loretta were broad, cartoonish characters, great for short bursts of chaos. They'd swoop in, cause trouble, and leave you laughing and a little exhausted. The idea behind the Tortellis was simple. Let's give these big personalities their own playground. So Nick and Loretta moved to Las Vegas, where Nick is trying to reconnect with his estranged son and navigate his dysfunctional extended family. Instead of the cozy, grounded bar where everybody knows your name, we get a sunnier, louder, more chaotic domestic sitcom set in the neon glow of Vegas. The issue is tone. On Cheers, Nick and Loretta worked because they were balanced by more grounded characters like Sam, Diane, Carla, and Frasier. In the Tortellis, everyone is operating at that same loud, exaggerated level. There's no real straight man, no emotional anchor, so the humor starts to feel like constant noise. Jokes are bigger, but not necessarily funnier. The heart that made Cheers so beloved is mostly missing. Audiences didn't connect. The Tortellis premiered in early 1987 and was gone by May, lasting only 13 episodes. It's especially fascinating to look back on now, because it shows just how delicate the spin-off formula really is. You can't just spin out the wackiest side characters and hope they'll suddenly support an entire series. But if the Tortellis is a cautionary tale about side characters, our number one entry is something else entirely. A spin-off from one of the most beloved TV dramas of all time, built around major characters, and still considered one of the most famous TV misfires ever. 1. AfterMASH, when lightning refused to strike twice. If you were making a list of safest bets in TV history, a spin-off from MASH would be right near the top. The original series was a phenomenon, hugely popular, critically acclaimed, and still one of the most watched shows in syndication. Its finale was a cultural event. So when CBS announced AfterMASH, it seemed like a no-brainer. Of course, people would want to see what happened next. AfterMASH follows three familiar faces: Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulkey. The war is over, and they're now working at a Veterans Administration hospital back in the States. The idea is to take the mix of humor and heart that defined MASH and transplant it into a new setting, focusing on the struggles of veterans adjusting to civilian life. On paper, that's a powerful concept. The trouble is that the execution never quite lived up to it. MASH worked because it balanced absurdity and horror, laughter and trauma, all against the vivid backdrop of a war zone. The characters were constantly under pressure, and that tension gave even the jokes a certain bite. In AfterMASH, the stakes feel lower, and the stories more conventional. Hospital bureaucracy, workplace conflicts, and smaller-scale personal issues don't land with the same weight. Stylistically, AfterMASH also looked and felt more like a standard early 80s multi-camera sitcom than the more cinematic style MASH evolved into. Viewers who tuned in hoping for something that felt like a continuation of the original series were hit with something that felt safer, more ordinary. And when you're following one of the greatest shows of all time, ordinary is a death sentence. The show actually started strong in the ratings, riding the goodwill of MASH. But as the novelty wore off and the flaws became clear, audience interest dropped. Time slot changes didn't help. After 2 uneven seasons, CBS pulled the plug. AfterMASH is the ultimate example of spin-off expectations gone wrong. Sometimes, no matter how beloved the source material is, the magic just doesn't transfer. Conclusion. Looking back at these 7 forgotten spin-offs, a pattern starts to emerge, and it's not just the 80s were weird. Networks kept making the same bets. Take a popular character or family, move them into a new setting, and assume the audience will follow. Sometimes that meant pulling a side character like Florence or Nick Tortelli into the spotlight. Other times, it meant trying to grow up familiar faces like the Brady sisters, Joanie and Chachi, or Jack Tripper. And in the case of AfterMASH, it meant trying to continue one of the most revered TV legacies ever. What these flops all prove is that a recognizable name isn't enough. Checking in showed that fan-favorite characters don't automatically translate to strong premises. The Brady Brides and Joanie Loves Chachi reminded us that nostalgia can only carry you so far if the stories aren't compelling. Gloria and Three's a Crowd highlighted how fragile ensemble chemistry is. Pull one piece out, and the whole thing can wobble. The Tortellis demonstrated the danger of building an entire show around personalities that work best in small doses. And AfterMASH, well, that one is a lesson in understanding when to let a classic stand on its own. But that's also what makes TV history so fun to revisit. These forgotten spin-offs are like alternate timelines. You can see what networks hoped audiences wanted, and how far off the mark they sometimes were. For every Frasier, there are a handful of Tortellis and Brady Brides lurking in the archives. If you remember any of these shows airing, or if there's a forgotten spin-off we didn't mention, drop it in the comments. And if you want us to tackle the disastrous spin-offs of the 1990s next, let us know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the weird, wonderful world of classic TV.